Hey everyone, Reed here with Big Strong Book. Today we're talking about Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is, I suppose, a long time coming in a way, at least Dostoevsky is for me. Uh, Prior to Crime and Punishment, I had never finished one of his novels, read it straight through. I have made numerous attempts with the works of Dostoevsky in the past, with Crime and Punishment before, with Notes from Underground, with The Idiot, and with the Brothers Karamazov. And for whatever reason, I had yet to kind of just break through and finally read one of his works from start to finish. Obviously, a writer of the eminence of Dostoevsky needs no introduction. Um, you know, 19th century literature, indeed world literature, leading into the 20th century, with his eminent influence not only on the modernists to a degree, with his psychological insight, but also his existentialist influence into the authors like Camus, Sartre. I'm sure Beckett could be included in that. The practitioners of the theater of the absurd, and leading further on. And I think in Dostoevsky's influence still stands even to more modern at least in terms of reference to our time, authors like I think Cormac McCarthy, one of my favorite authors. I think he directly ties his influence to Dostoevsky, in particular the brothers Karamazov. But for whatever reason, Dostoevsky, he had eluded me, and I I don't really know why. For example, I've read some of the works of Tolstoy. I've read Anna Karenina. I've read a handful of his novellas and short stories, and I love Tolstoy, and he's wonderful. And Dostoevsky is uh, he is different than Tolstoy, certainly, um, in his insights into, I think it's almost like he works from outer circumstances to the interior self, whereas Tolstoy works in almost the opposite way, uh, kind of trying to paint a more broader societal picture with his work. Um, so I think that Tolstoy and Dostoevsky are in a respect cut from the same cloth, but I think with the way that they work is almost an inverse. Of course, I should also mention that I am I I still have yet to make grounds in terms of the other eminent Russian literary figures of the 19th and of the 20th century as well. Writers like Gogol, Turgenev, Pushkin, uh, still elude me as well. Chekhov, I mean, quite literally all of them. I can't pronounce his name. The author of the Gulag Archipelago, getting into the 20th century. Boris Pasternak, Dr. Zhivago, texts of that nature, again, still elude me. I love the environment and the pull of the Russian novel, of Russian prose. It is unique in its own way, and it Russia probably stands second only to France, and I think in terms of the quality of the prose writers that a nation can produce. Um, it is arguably superior, I think, to France, but it is certainly at the very least second. Um, Especially with their all of a sudden dominance of 19th century. Of course, I think the greatness of French literature extends further into the past than that of the Russian. But again, that's just my view. Anyways, so getting into Crime and Punishment. Um, so I do have to say, so this is the Pevier Volokonsky translation, and they've kind of been my go-tos generally for when I've read Russian works, or at least attempted to read Russian works. I know that I think that there's a lot of perhaps controversy on the interwebs about the Pevier Volokonsky translations, that they perhaps are too literal. It lacks the prose panache of older translations, or that it's just a bunch of marketing hype to present their translations as the best or the most eminent of those currently available. And but I have liked their translations, so I can't speak for other better translations or the older translations, like the Constance Garnett, the early 20th century translations that have um, still maintained their influence. But I do have to note, this is a published by Vintage Classics. I the they say this is the back of the book. This is the summary. It is a murder story, they say, told from a murderer's point of view, true, that implicates even the most innocent reader in its enormities, sure. It is a cat and mouse game between a tormented young killer and a cheerfully implacable detective. I do not agree with that. It is a preternaturally acute investigation of the forces that impel a man towards sin, suffering, and grace. Yes. Why include the cat and mouse bit? Sure, there are elements of that, but it's not the driving force. And that was a misconception that I had coming into this book, that it would be more of a cat and mouse, the murderer versus the detective. And from there, we get into a lot of the philosophical implication that is there to respect. A lot of the philosophical underpinnings of this work come within those moments of the murderer and the detective when they interact with one another. But what this book is about, it is crime and punishment. It is about a young man, a former student down on his luck named Raskolnikov, and he commits, and this isn't a spoiler, it happens very early on in the book. He has he goes to this old woman who runs a little pawn shop. She'll pawn jewelry and stuff to give destitute individuals some quick cash, of course, which they have to then pay back at a exorbitant, almost unpayable interest rate. But Raskolnikov almost randomly, or it seems random at first, but he, as the novel progresses, as he kind of descends into this personal strife and sadness and despair, attempts to almost justify his actions, and so he commits this act of violence, this murder, murdering this old woman, and I think it's not her daughter, but her sister. But anyway, he commits two murders in an attempt to get out of his station in life. That's or at least that's the little bit of how he further tries to justify what he did. Now, this is of course set. This is the backdrop with which this psychological novel is set. Is that of Petersburg, or St. Petersburg. I'm not sure if it was called St. Petersburg or if it was just referred to as simply Petersburg. So I'll call it that, the city of Petersburg, which is in itself almost a pulsating character, within which these characters have to contend with their circumstances. And Raskolnikov, he has a mother and a sister, whom he fears is being taken advantage of, and is kind of giving herself over to the suitor, Luzhin, who she will then kind of facilitate or push his money towards her brother, who's destitute, and he does not want to do that. And it is with that kind of this type of weight that he feels on his shoulders. He feels both sorrow genuinely and generally for himself, for those like him, and he is also surrounded by this kind of network of friends that view Raskolnikov's genius, or they're able to note it, and Raskolnikov is, as he's moving in his life in the wake of this these two murders that he has committed, he so he justifies it essentially by, and this is kind of towards the middle of the book, but he justifies this murder in a way. I don't even think it's really in a genuine way, but he ties it back to an article he wrote while he was a student about how great historical figures such as Napoleon, if all that remained, all that stood in their path to greatness for the greater common good was the bodies and murders of old women, would that stop great figures if they had to essentially step over and commit violent acts to then get to a place where they were, able to come into influence and power, if that justified the murders? Now, Raskolnikov says that, in a dialogue with the detective as he's meeting with him and a couple of his acquaintances, and I don't really believe for a second that Raskolnikov, and we kind of, he wrestles with it, is that he's constantly in a state of attempting to justify it and to skirt away from the responsibility that he faces. But he, and I think Dostoevsky is noted for this, and of course I can't exactly pull from his other novels because this is the first that I've read straight through. Raskolnikov in a way becomes this sort of Christ-like figure, but not in terms of virtue, but in terms of struggle and suffering that he takes on himself, a suffering to try and provide, especially for this family of a man that he meets earlier on in the novel. This man who Marmeladov, or I'm gonna butcher a lot of these characters' names, so I apologize for that. Let me get to this dramatis personae that's in the book. Marmeladov and Katerina Ivanova, his wife, and his children, especially Sonia, is the most prominent of all of these. And there, for a while, I kind of feared that this novel was going in a direction of being bogged down in a lot of subplots. And now the subplots, it's a lot of it related to Raskolnikov's sister Dunya, as she is kind of as the family is kind of under siege by these suitors, these individuals, these men who wish to kind of manipulate these individuals to try and siphon money from them. And there's the interesting character of Svidrigailov, a former suitor of Dunya, who is engaged and almost like simultaneously wants to ruin Raskolnikov, but also it shows instances of great empathy, and particularly towards Sonia and her siblings and her family, kind of in this destitute situation. And it's almost as if the characters within this book are they're always trying to avoid suffering in a way, always trying to seek an escape, and the kind of spherical type of just, of, one could argue, institutionalized poverty, of institutionalized suffering, that there is no way to escape it. And again, that's why we get these characters who almost try to commit rash actions. We also get great moments later on in the book, in particular in part 6, of characters who attempt to get out of their situations by committing rash acts, violent acts, murders, and they find themselves unable to. A gun will be fired, and it will just kind of lightly skim the intended target. The gun will jam. Forces outside of their control. There is very much so an infused spirituality within this book. And Raskolnikov, in his very tortured way, in some ways it kind of, hinges onto the point of being so overdone and so persistent with his kind of feverish uh, moods that he finds himself in. Um, but then there are the great moments when, and I apologize if this is getting into spoiler territory. I mean, this is, you can kind of almost intuit what happens in this book just on the themes alone. So I'll kind of just talk more openly about specifics in the plot, so you've been warned. Um, when he's meeting with a detective, and then this man who was at the scene of the crime and who almost saw Raskolnikov, how he just in a fit of madness kind of falsely confesses, and Raskolnikov almost sees himself off the hook there. And Raskolnikov, in a greater respect, he wrestles with his spirituality. This is almost like a conversion story. And what's interesting is that I learned after the fact, I had known that Dostoevsky was for a time imprisoned. He was, I think, in a penal colony in Siberia, and I didn't realize that this was like the first significant work that he wrote after being released, which makes complete sense in hindsight, that this is the kind of novel that Dostoevsky would feel compelled to write. And for a while, even leading into part six, my takeaway from this book was that it had a lot of great philosophical, thematical underpinnings, but that were kind of beset by these sludgy passages of subplots that I think did not rise to the greatness that some nuggets of brilliance within this book were. But I think everything, I would maybe dock it a few marks for that, but I really loved the epilogue of this book. I loved the cold, detached nature that it took. Funny that then as I read more about the broader historical critical view of Crime and Punishment, the epilogue is actually again, historically, it is one of the most criticized aspects of the book for taking us almost out of the intense psychological bereft points of view of these characters when we are no longer given that privilege. I think that it is almost necessary as Raskolnikov confesses, as he is sentenced, as he goes to Siberia, and Sonia goes with him. And that is probably, there's the sacrifice of Raskolnikov. He willingly takes on more suffering for himself, but in a way his suffering sets him free towards a redemptive path. And Sonia as well takes on perhaps even more of a burden than Raskolnikov, because she leaves everybody in Petersburg behind, leaves her family behind, even though Sverdlovov kind of gives her the money before he commits suicide in a kind of a stunning act. She leaves them all behind, and one of the greatest, I think one of the greatest scenes of this book, even before all of that, was I think the ending of I think it's part 5, with the barrel organ scene in the square, and as Katerina Ivanova falls victim finally to consumption, and this again, that's, well, like the weight to provide constantly. I mean, money is such an absolute focus in here, as well, but is not, granted, money being a link to happiness, or illustrating that money is not imperative to one's happiness or one's redemptive grace that can be taken on. That's certainly not, I think, what Dostoevsky is saying something as simple as that. But those are the kinds of like nuggets of brilliance leading into part 6 that I was admiring, but that I worried that those were spread too far and few between. But the barrel organ scene at the end of part 5 is an all-timer, and especially the ending of part 6, when Raskolnikov abases himself and kisses the earth in the square before going in to make a final confession. And the fact that he leaves and then seeing Sonia again, turns around and goes back, and does that. And it's a very beautiful moment, a beautiful scene. And though those moments of beauty, it takes a while to get, but the staying power of those moments and scenes that Dostoevsky creates are wonderful. I didn't really note, and this just came after reading this, but the views of the structure that Dostoevsky put into place of, I think, splitting parts 1 through 3 and then 4 through 6. 1 through 3 is kind of the descent of Raskolnikov, parts 4 through 6 plus the epilogue being his slow path to redemption. And I did notice there are a lot of moments in the back half of this book where Raskolnikov, he is a figure almost in the shadows in the background, as if it becomes almost truly internal for him, but internal in a way that the audience is not let in. There were a lot of moments of that where he would be in crucial scenes, but he would be a side character, so much so to the point that others would not even notice him in the scene. Just interesting food for thought. It's this work was it is much more interesting. I think I'm getting more out of it in retrospect, being able to see the full scope of the story, even though you kind of figure a story about a murder and a story called Crime and Punishment, it is not going to the punishment will not elude the punishment will not elude us in the course of the narrative, and of course it does not. And I'm curious with perhaps I won't directly go back to Dostoevsky immediately after this, but I can definitely see like really soon in the future, because I have a few of his other texts. I have The Idiot, Demons, Notes from Underground, and Brothers Karamazov. I might reapproach them, perhaps Notes from Underground being a leaner, shorter work. But to reapproach him, I think Dostoevsky is an author that will, I think, really grow on me. And it'll be interesting to kind of view some of his more of the works from his mature period, to see where that goes and to see where that takes the reader. Again, I think my admiration for the Russian novel continues within this, maybe not to the level I think the immediate staying power of a figure like Tolstoy, but of course this is just one work. So, it's dense. It would almost take, I think, a second reading to really glean a good, true perspective. But yeah, TBD on the future of Dostoevsky, but I can definitely see myself returning to him soon. So, Crime and Punishment, the classic. If you've read it, let me know what you think. And as always, I will see you guys next time.